So I'm joined again by Tamara Liebman from Calibrate Legal. This time we're going to talk about terms of trade because we see loads of SMEs, particularly when they come to me for finance, who had they had a sound terms of trade in place earlier, there's lots of ways they could have freed up their cash flow. So I would like to pick Tamara's brains about what the importance of terms of trade are and what kind of things you need to have in them to protect yourself.
Oh, hi Gemma. I love talking about terms of trade. So terms of trade are a type of supply agreement really. So when you have terms of trade, there are standard terms that sit alongside the quote or proposal that will have the specific terms like price, what is being supplied, when it's to be supplied, when payments to be made, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It's a contract, right? But the two of them together form a contract. You can have a bespoke agreement, which is a separate one for each customer, but if you're not going to do that, then standard terms of trade is the way to go. Mm-hmm. So terms of trade are really important because you can do a contract orally and it is still legal, old school handshake agreements. But the problem with those is that inevitably there is detail that's left out, and it's where there are gaps and things are left out is where disputes can come up and where you have increased risk. So, for example, if you don't have your payment terms in your terms of trade that say, when payment is to be made, and if it's late, can you charge interest on that? Can you charge an additional fee? Can you send it to debt collectors, and can you get the cost of those debt collectors back? All of that stuff needs to be in there, because if it's not in there in writing, then you can't apply it, and it's going to cost you money. So that's an example of something that you really need to have in your terms of trade. Other conditions that are really useful are liability limitations. So when you're doing B2B, the Consumer Guarantees Act doesn't apply, which means that you can put all sorts of liability limitations in. You can talk about, if there's intellectual property, who owns the intellectual property? Is it the customer who owns it? Because that's the default position, say, under the Copyright Act. But if it's not, if you just want to give them a license, then you need to say that in the terms and conditions. There's, a bit more that can go in there, like we were talking about security. So if you are supplying on credit and you want to make sure that you've got security over the goods that you haven't been paid for, you need to have a PPSA clause in your terms and conditions that the customer has agreed to. Yep. So that means that you can enforce and go back and repossess those goods if you haven't been paid for them, or if your customer goes into liquidation, then at least you're top of the queue to get your goods back that haven't been paid for. So there's you can do them in a page, but there's a lot that goes in there, and it's really important.
Yeah, and this a topic I wanted to cover because, we see people who, they've got a debtor who won't pay and they're coming to me for a loan to get through a tricky spot while they sort this out with their cash flow. But had their terms of trade been sound, there would be specifications in there for, collecting debt, who pays, and if you're a small business and you've got a debtor who's a really big company that you really want to have on board, but they want 60-day payment terms, you can add in there admin fees or whatever, so that you could actually take an invoice financing facility, but it doesn't come at a cost to you. And there's all sorts of things like that if you get them in early enough, they can actually protect your cash flow, which is one of the reasons I found this topic so important to cover, because lots of SMEs don't realise until they really need that cash flow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people don't realise how much they can manage their business risk by having good conditions, having good contracts. They're not just a nice to have, they're really vital for making your business sustainable and able to grow.
Yeah, and like any agreement, I suppose, getting it all in writing while everyone's feeling good and on the same page is probably easier than when there's a dispute in place.
By then, the horse is bolted.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. And as before, I'm going to put some links through to Tamara and to Calibrate, so that if you want to continue the conversation or figure out how it applies to you, you can reach out to Tamara directly, because I think it's really important for you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you, Tamara.